Hey, welcome to ProSpeak. And yes, I'm Jeffrey Lane, and I've got a great guest here this evening, David Gouthro, and I'll get to him in a moment. If you are a professional speaker, a professional facilitator, you lead workshops at home, I'm at work, maybe you lead them from home, or you just are interested in the whole process of engaging and exciting and inspiring an audience, you're in the right place. And the guest I have this evening, I'm really excited about. His name is David Gouthro. He's got CSP behind his name, and I'm going to ask him to explain what that is. And okay, welcome, David. Please tell us kind of what you do. And even though I know, I'm going to ask you questions. So David, welcome to ProSpeak.
Can I talk now? You told me not to talk.
Oh, you could talk now.
Okay, I follow directions very closely. So basically, I do three things, Jeffrey. Most of my work is facilitation. So I do a lot of planning sessions in a whole variety of industries. So I have a process expertise as opposed to a content expertise. So I don't actually give advice. I help people get that themselves, and it keeps my insurance premiums down. So that's about 80% of what I do, mostly in small groups, but sometimes it's facilitating groups as large as 500 or 600, which tends to be a design issue. Then I do maybe 10% as emceeing conferences, which I love to do because it's lots of fun and just stringing things together. And then the other 15%, I guess that's 105%, I teach math. No, I do keynote speaking, mostly around organizational cultural change. So working with large groups, with the entire system, to kind of give them a different way to look at what they're doing so they can engage a little more fully with their organization and the changes they're going through. So those are the three main things I do.
Well, I should tell the audience where I met you, which was at the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. And at the time, you just blew me away by the way you were able to engage and inspire the audience, and you had a nose flute. And I have never forgotten it. In fact, recently I found it again, and now I've lost it again, or maybe it's, but that way of engaging and sense of humor. So why do you work so hard to engage people? What's are the three things that you focus on?
You know, I'd probably say that I don't work hard at it. I think I do it just because it's enjoyable. It comes quite easily because I like people. I enjoy conversations. My preference would not to be to stand at the front of a group and just yap at people, but rather find a way to get a conversation going, either amongst themselves or with me. And part of that is that part is to keep me on the edge. I know it's always challenging. Some speakers have a hard time when the audience gets to talk back, and I actually enjoy that. So part of it is to keep me fresh, keep me on the edge, maybe keep the adrenaline pumping a little bit, but also I think it's just more respectful of the audience to engage them and keep them going. One of the tragedies, I think, in a lot of the way that we run conferences and sessions is you have one person at the front and anywhere from 10 to 1,000 people sitting out in the audience who go out with one person's perspective on an issue. And it just seems such a waste of talent and intellectual capital to not get those 1,000 people to engage with whatever the situation or the issue or the problem is. I think that model's got to change, quite frankly.
You and I, before the program started, you were showing me your business card, and I was quite impressed with the message on the back of it. And as many of us, I also facilitate. I lead workshops, and of course, the primary workshop I lead is presentation power, which I lead all over the country. I recently was in Houston. It's me doing a little plug here, David.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved your card. In fact, it reminded me that I used to put it on my card, but not quite. Can you put it up to the camera so people can
Sure.
take a look at it, because it's very good. Can you speak white, David?
No, I can't. I can't do physical activity and talk at the same time. I always had a problem with So what it says for those that that can't read it either because it's too small or
That's good. Tell us what's on it.
okay, so there's three things that I talk about in my work in terms of how I position myself. And the three words that I use are focus, flexible, and fun. So focused on achieving your desired outcomes as a client. I think that's the baseline. That's the ante. If I'm not able to do that, I don't deserve to get paid. The second thing is to be flexible. So I don't think I've ever done a workshop, a session of any kind that's gone exactly as planned. So part of it is knowing what the client is focused on to be flexible in terms of different ways to get there. And the third one is one that piece of fun, something that I never really talked about before because I thought perhaps it was unprofessional. But I now realize it's actually a pretty important differentiator. Quite often I get asked to come in and because they know I could do the focused and flexible part, but they also want to have fun and feel they get good value, but don't feel beat up at the end of the day. So I think purposeful fun is really important in the work that I do, and that's why I put it on the card. In fact, I enjoy playing with business cards. I realize that sounds kind of kinky, but I quite often go walking in the morning with my dog, and you know how you're walking along, you've had a great deep conversation with the person beside you, and just as about, they're about to leave, they say, "Oh, my name's Bob, by the way," or "My name's Joanne, by the way." So now I go, "You're kidding." What a small world. My name is David, by the way. So I actually got some cards made up with my last name, by the way. And all the other information is still the same, but it's just as a way to have fun and make the point that, sometimes you say, by the way, when it's something that's actually important. I've got other cards. One has the title Shift Perturber. And then this one says, organizational laxative, because that's a lot of what I do. I don't usually give that out when I'm having lunchtime conversations. And then I have one here that on one side, and you won't be able to read this, but it says, whoops, wrong side. It says Flaw Finder as a title. And on the other side, it says Flow Finder. And I let people know that I can do either one of those sorts of things. And usually people say, you know what, we have enough flaw finders in our organization. We'd really like to talk to you about being a flow finder and how you go about doing that. So that's kind of a fun way to use business cards, but also a way that positions what I do and perhaps more importantly, how I go about doing it.
I decided I would try not giving out a business card. Because I've gone through, possibly like you, thousands of cards, and they didn't seem fun or relevant anymore. But recently I was on a very long flight, and I got sitting next to a very dynamic and interesting man who has a very interesting company, and I actually recommended you to him. For one of the things that he wanted to do internally. And so I'm rethinking my cards. I'm rethinking. So one of the things, how much do you adapt with the audience? Do you do much audience research? You know that I recommended in my book. It's kind of, I think, standard procedure for someone. But do you do a lot of research?
I do. I use an instrument called fluid surveys. They've now been purchased by SurveyMonkey, but I do a lot of surveys in advance. I actually use that one because the data is housed in Canada, which is really important for some of my clients. But I will do things. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I was doing some work for the credit union a month or so ago, and it was supposed to be on, it wasn't supposed to be, it was in fact on leadership. So the survey that I sent out, I asked them, what are some words that come to mind when they think of leadership? What are some words that they think of when they think of management, just to see if they made that distinction? And then to think of some dilemmas that they actually find as a leader in the organization. So I used that information a couple of different ways. One was to get a sense of the insightfulness or the level of depth of understanding of those terms when I was planning what I was going to do. But I actually had a page on everyone's table when they came in on, here's some of the things that you said about leadership. So they could see that I was actually using the information. One of the things that we wanted to do is have them understand how to have tough leadership conversations. And so I used the examples that they gave in their own organization as case studies. So I use it to prepare myself for the presentation, but also to develop the to use in the activities. And I just realized, Jeffrey, that my email is going off, and that's what all that beeping is. I don't know if that's coming through, so I'm just going to turn that off. There we go. Okay. I'm not sure if you could hear that, but
yeah, I was hearing it.
Okay, so that was very gracious of you not to say turn that darn thing off, but we're now good to go. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Like you, I use surveys to get an idea of where the client is at, and I typically respond as a way of acknowledging. It depends on the group. Mm-hmm. Recently, I had a group of 60. It wasn't possible to respond to all of them, but I did respond to several people. And when I'm facilitating a workshop kind of process, I'm usually working with quite small groups, maybe maximum 14, and I respond to every one of those. But
well,
I also take a search on Google for the common issues in that. So I say, what are the common issues in, let's say it's engineering in the Southwest United States, just as an example. I just made that up. That will get you lots of industry chatter as well. Do you use that?
I don't. What I will do, though, is something similar. That I'll ask them who their competitors are, and then I'll Google their competitors to find out what's going on in the industry that way as well. I mean, part of the problem is there's so much information that what's going to be the most useful to them. So I guess my response to just about any of the questions you're going to ask me is probably going to be it depends. There's a whole pile of factors around that. One of the things that I also do in addition to the survey, excuse me, I will do a short video clip that introduces myself and has the URL for the survey. So it does a couple of things. First of all, I find that people will spend 1 minute to 2 minutes looking at a video, if it's done well, much more readily than they will 1 to 2 minutes of reading some text. So I want to be able to introduce a little bit about what the program's about. They get a sense of who I am because they see me on video and start to create a sense of that. So rapport is starting to build before they even see me live. And it also gives them more of a reason why to answer the survey. So just sending out a survey without it really well positioned, I think that you get a very low return. And I'd say the same for doing a survey after the session, to send out a little customized video clip. It doesn't take long. It's very easy to do. Here's how we're going to use this information. It's going to help us make the next programs even better. And I want to make sure that the information that you got out of it is shared with everyone else, so that learning can be shared throughout the organization. And I find the use of videos is very, very helpful.
Well, I think you're extremely good with video, and you're good on the camera because you're relaxed and you understand it's a small frame. One of the, at least that's my observation. Now that's, I train people for video, as you know. I do that all the time. So what do you use to shoot your short video clips?
So I set up a green screen, and I have a couple of rooms in my office here. So one of my setup is a green screen with lots of lights, because that's very important. I use a wireless mic because that's also very important. I find people are much more forgiving of video that's not quite so good, but there's zero tolerance for poor audio. There's no reason for that.
I absolutely agree.
And I used to use a video camera for that, but now I just use a Panasonic Lumix camera that can take really good photos, which I do, but it also do 4K video. So I just hook the microphone right into the camera, and I just start recording and back up to wherever it might happen to be. I can always edit that part out and just start speaking. And I like to do it with just one continuous shoot. So if I blow it, you'll probably hear oh, whatever might go in the end of the oh statement. And I just cut that out and just keep going, because I just don't have the patience or the tolerance, first of all, to script things, and then to edit it like crazy. So it's just really natural. This is what you get. And it might be sort of the middle of a series of things that I've said. But I find that that's a much easier way to do the editing. So I don't do anything fancy. I use iMovie, do a little bit of editing that my daughter showed me how to do, when in doubt, go to a teenager. And so, it takes me 5 minutes maybe to do a 2-minute video, and then 5 minutes to edit it and upload it to Vimeo, and away it goes. So really simple.
Ah, that's good. Good strategy. I noticed you use iMovie, so you must be a Mac user.
Oh, maybe.
Maybe.
I worked for Apple for 6 years, so I sort of got hooked between 81 and 87. So I've been a constant Mac aficionado.
Yeah, me too. My first one was a Mac SE way back in 86. In those days, you had to write little programs sometimes to get things done.
This is true. I remember launching the Mac when there was only 2 programs, Mac Write and Mac Paint. And when we were doing the demos and the introductions to the major accounts and things like that, you always had to have one foot on the floor that had been heavily sprayed with anti-static spray, because you can only say, I'm glad that happened. Let me show you how we recover from this so often.
Yes, I loved Mac Paint. Even as it evolved, I loved it. And Mac Write, I think, well, I'm sad that at one point Apple gave up and then got back into it. But I'm glad they're back into it now. So that's good.
If you're wondering why I'm bouncing around, it's because I have a chair that's got an exercise ball on it. I'm usually not quite this fidgety. It just happens to work.
So what is the number one thing for engagement, would you say?
Well, I think, first of all, it's something internal, which is actually believing that other people have something to offer. I think that's absolutely fundamental, because otherwise, if you use techniques to engage people and you're going in your head, what do they know? I'm just going through the motions. People get that. So I think, first of all, there has to be a belief that people have something to offer and that they're a whole lot smarter than I am. I think that was a big learning for me many years ago, that if I set myself up, if I measure my I guess my value or self-perception or things like that, when I've thrown into it, and I felt I had to be the expert, and that is such a tough position to hold. So once I started viewing myself as a learner, the only way I could fail is if I failed to learn. So regardless of what the experience of the group was, I could always find something to learn. Remember one time traveling with some work I was doing for Chrysler, and my client went down to the bar for a drink, and I was just miserable. He said, "What's the matter? That program went great." I said, "Yeah, I've been racking my brain trying to think of something I could do differently and that I would have done differently. I couldn't think of anything." It was that important to me to be able to learn from everything that I do. So knowing that I have things to learn is really critical. I think the next thing is designing for engagement. So giving people an opportunity to talk amongst themselves in twos and threes and in groups, have ways to report in. You can actually engineer for engagement in a large group. And I'll give you an example. I was co-facilitating with a good friend and colleague of mine, Alistair Smith, 600 people. And we wanted them to be engaged. It was a 3-hour session. So we had sheets at the tables for people to record responses to some of the questions that we posed that we were going to gather and feedback. But you can't do report-its with 600 people. Table 1, table 2. Like by the time you get to table 600, the meeting's been over for 5 days. But we did want people to stay engaged. So we said, here's what we're going to do. When we have time for debriefing, we just want to get a sense of the different ideas of what's in the room. So we had a random number generator on an iPad and said, when your number is called, get up to the closest microphone and just give a sense of what went on at your table. Well, that encourages, some could say, forces people to participate, because you don't want to be embarrassed if your number is called and you have nothing to say. So it was really interesting. It's a great way to manage the time. You could get as many people participating as you had time for, but the process itself caused people to be engaged. Plus, they knew that the information was going to come back to them, so there was value there. I think if you engage, it has to be purposeful, so people see that it's something in it for them. What I rail against is that sort of the mindless hold up your hands sort of thing. Right? If you've ever taken a deep breath, hold up your pen. If I'm not going to use that information, why would I ask the question? I think that's disrespectful of the audience. But if I want something specific or concrete, might say, okay, here's why this is important for me. It would be really helpful to know how many of you fit into this category. I know if people just ask me to raise my hand when I'm in the audience, I won't. Even if I agree, I won't, because I don't like someone ask me to put up my hand. Sometimes I'll tell people, it drives me crazy and people hold up their hands. What I want you to do is just give me a blink with your left eye and a shrug, just like that. And when there's a ton of people, you can't really see anything, but it engages people physically.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question. That's
yeah,
what I
that
wanted
does
to say.
actually. I mean, one of the things I recently was working with essentially chemists, scientists, and engineers and chemists, and it was so interesting when I got the survey responses back. I knew what they wanted to know and where they wanted to go and what the end result was. And because they were by nature, as you say, you know, you put a group of researchers together, they suddenly become this massive researchers. So most of the normal things that I would do in the workshop, I still did, but I added questions. I added questions that would involve them. And, you know, so what did you think of that? And what's your thoughts about this? Could you do it a different way? And that elicits from them very thoughtful, deep processes. And I take the position of lifelong learning, you know, from Senge's work, the fifth discipline. I mean, I actually went and did a workshop with him. He's brilliant. I don't know if he does them anymore, but that whole process of setting up that there's lifelong learning, that you're never the master, you're always the student. I take the same position. I like that one.
So, you know, a couple of things came to mind when you were speaking, Jeffrey, and one of them, sometimes professionals get great joy in finding the gray lining in the silver cloud. It's like they have these little crap detectors on that are looking for things that are wrong with other things and other people. And every time it goes off, it's like, yay, better seat in heaven. So sometimes if you know the group is like that, is to present them with some information and say something like, so what's the flaw in this argument? Or what piece is missing? And then once they identify that, say, so how would you turn that around? How would you make that right? How would you make that relevant? So go where their strength is with the criticism and then turn it around and engage them in making it better. But what occurred to me, this may be a little bit too bizarre with the chemists, is you know how tables have a number on it, table 1, table 3. So what if they had like Na, Cl, you know, O, and there were all the elements, and you tell people to go to their periodic table.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That would be cool. Now you have an acid and a base. They'll come together and create a salt, you know. So if you want groups to get together, that would be hilarious.
That would be hilarious. That would
it
be
wouldn't work with engineers so much, but chemists, they'd be all over it.
Yes, it's very interesting. Engineers are a very different breed of presenters and communicators. It's very different.
Well, you know, as we were talking about earlier before the show, that I find, especially with professionals of any sort, when they're together, they gravitate around the stereotype of that profession. But if you can get them speaking one-on-one, they're just as diverse. They have the same sense of humor as anyone. It's how you create an environment that allows them to be individuals in what would normally be an environment that causes them to gravitate around a stereotype.
So I think we're coming close to wrapping this up. If you were going to give a beginner, a raw beginner, you know, they've developed a process, they've learned how to facilitate, they've taken that kind of training, and they're getting ready to really get themselves out in the face of their clients to try and build business, what would be 3 things you would say to them?
Send to me. I'll take their business. No, I'd say probably in terms of getting ready, I would recommend for anyone that's going to work with a group is to take improvisational theater training. Because I think that's a fast way to get over yourself. And I think when you're in the role of facilitator, you have to it's not about you at all. And I think improv gets you thinking about how to make the other person look good. So that's one thing. I think the second thing would be just to develop a practice of taking a deep breath and just physically and metaphorically thinking, let go. Because if you have to be in control, either when you're in front of a client or you're in front of a group, that really gets in the way. So I think purposeful relaxing is important. So your job there is to help them get value. It's not about you and to let go of. And that's tough because you think you're on stage when you're first starting out. In fact, you are on stage, but it's not about you. You're there to facilitate their learning, not to be proving yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing is to understand that not all things come in threes.
Oh, thank you, David. That's true. Not all things come in threes. And I'll take that as your third one, which is have a sense of humor and have a sense of fun with everything that you're doing. And I want to say, both personally and professionally and from my heart, thank you very much for being a guest. And thank you, everybody, for watching ProSpeak number 22 with Smile. The audience is watching. And I'm going to log off, but David, don't disappear.
Okay.